Okay. Hi guys. Hi. Welcome. All of you coming out at 11:15 on Friday. I really appreciate it. We will get to end this day and start the next day together. Yeah. It's exciting. I will say. I don't know if anyone else does panels, but there's nothing weirder than seeing your panel on like 2 days and being like, do I do this panel twice? Like, what's happening? But, just the nature of the beast. So welcome to For the Love of Folklore. This is about folklore and using Japanese folklore and using Rumiko Takahashi's work to give you examples of said folklore. I'm a little bit a fan of Rumiko Takahashi, and I hope all of you are too, because this panel is much more fun when you like her work and her manga. And I do try to stick to her manga a little bit more than the anime interpretations. I'll mention them, but I do try to stick to her manga. But in case you are not familiar with who Rumiko Takahashi is and why she's awesome, this is why she's awesome. She's a really prolific author. She started writing in the 1970s. She is still writing. She still has a book. She still has a series currently in publication, both in Japan and being released in the US as well. And she's very influential because anyone who's been writing this long and successfully, of course, influences people because that's how the world works. But she is also someone who really steeps her work in a lot of folklore. And I was having this conversation with someone earlier today at a different panel, and they were talking about something, and they were talking about how it was, and this was not a work by Rumiko Takahashi, but they were talking about how Mushishi was the first work where they really, that was really steeped in folklore. And all I could think was, probably she had already seen something by Rumiko Takahashi, and it turned out she had. And they are so steeped in Japanese folklore, we just don't always realize it. But it's amazing, the amount of, the way she uses Japanese folklore to infuse her worlds with depth is epic and wonderful. And it really, if you see that, it lends a whole lot more realism, but also some poignancy and some other things to her work. So we're going to start with probably one that a lot of people are very familiar with, which are oni, right? So in Japan, these are basically anything that is dead and supernatural, right? Particularly supernatural. So if you have something that has powers and it is not a godly being, it is an oni. So it's a very broad category, initially. And there's a long history in Japan, as there are in all countries, of like demonizing enemies, clans, rivals, right? So a lot of members of clans and the imperial houses were demonized as oni and became conflated with oni. Especially when it was a purely Shinto country before Buddhism really came to Japan. As Buddhism started to come in, Buddhist images of Rasetsu started to mesh with the native Japanese oni. If you're not familiar, in Buddhism, Rasetsu is like a carnivorous demon, and the male Rasetsu are always ugly, and female Rasetsu are often beautiful. Also, in the Chinese zodiac, which Chinese astrology is a strong force in Japan, the direction of the northeast was considered to be the direction of demons. They were believed to come out of the northeast, which, if you think about, like, I don't know if you're very familiar with the geography of Japan, but that's like a very mountainous area and it's told, so that makes there's a lot of sense there that, and the people at this time were culturally different. They were not what we would consider in a lot of ways Japanese. They were a different ethnic group, and so they were very demonized. So because that region is associated with the bull, the Oni came to have like these bull horns, right? And then they were believed to be kind of brutish because they were associated with demons. And there's a long history of using Oni and demonizing invaders, refugees, and they really became linked to the idea of karmic retribution, right? Like if you do something bad, the Oni are going to get you, the Oni are going to torture you. Right, so that's sort of the folklore version of Oni. But if this is what they look like, right? They have horns, they wear tiger skin, maybe they have fangs. They're also associated to have power over lightning, to wield a club. They're often depicted as wielding like a club and being kind of brutish. So there's this little series, sort of obscure, called Urusei Yatsura, which is so obscure it just got a remake. And it is, of course, based on her manga of the same name. It was her first serialized work. So Rumiko Takahashi's actual first work was a standalone. It was published while she was in high school. It's sort of, you can see the genesis of Urusei Yatsura in that work. And basically, the title can sort of be taken to mean like you're being obnoxious, shut up, right? Which is often why it gets translated into English with the subtitle "Those Obnoxious Aliens." But the aliens in Urusei Yatsura are Oni, right? Like she is not alluding to Oni. She's not making them have Oni-like characteristics. They call themselves Oni. They look like Oni. I mean, they're not ugly by any means. But they dress in tiger skin. They have supernatural powers. They're very strong. They're kind of aggressive people, right? These are not, possible exception of Lum's mother. These are not quiet, take it on the chin, get knocked down, turn the other cheek kind of creatures. They are, I am mad at you and I'm going to fry you with my lightning bolt creatures. And intermittently, particularly in the manga, there's definitely some club use. Lum's father, for example, has a club. And if we take a closer look at Lum's father, so he is sort of a brash guy, right? Like he's loud. He is particularly obnoxious he's the leader, right? He's the king of the Oni. He's particularly brash and loud. But he's kind of not a bad guy. Sometimes he's kind of goofy, but you also get the idea he's kind of like an old-fashioned dad, right? Like they portray him as being not. Rumiko Takahashi portrays him as sort of being not with the times. But interestingly, he is actually based quite specifically on a character from Japanese folklore, Shoten Doji, who isn't Oni. He's someone who is known for sort of accepting who he is. Shoten Doji is as I mentioned, he's a famous Oni in Japanese folklore. who, there's several stories associated with them. One of them is actually a famous no play where he brings his gang down and like raids Kyoto. But in the folklore, he please believe that that as the character is not about hiding yourself. It's associated with just being true to yourself and being exactly who you portray. In Shoten Doji, the idea is that you want to hide who you are in order to remain human and less demonic. The more demonic you act, the more demonic you will appear. Rumiko Takahashi sort of deliberately subverts that trope, right? He does not pretend to be human, he doesn't act human, he's not going to be polite. But as you get deeper, you find out that he's actually like a really good protective father, he really loves Lum, he's really a good host, right? He treats him as a son-in-law, like that. He's really mad at him, right, about Lum and all these things, and he wants Lum to be treated well. But he's just like a good dad, and when he brings Ataro and everyone else like onto his ship, he like treats them right. He takes good care of them. So Lum is a deliberate inversion of this trope, right? That like you shouldn't be true to yourself. Lum's father, the king of the Oni, do be true to yourself. Don't pretend to be something else, and people will realize that you're a good person. Right? They will look beyond that mask that you hide and see you for your true self. And so I know Urusei Yatsura, of course, is like when they're an entire race, it's the most obvious version of the Oni that is possible to see. But they do appear in her other work. They appear a little bit in Inuyasha. They make several sporadic appearances throughout the series. Most notably to me is that when Sesshomaru first appears, he's riding on the shoulder of a giant Oni. Goshiki, which is an incarnation of Naraku, is based on it as an Oni as well. And they appear also in manga such as Kyukai no Rine, which, of course, because that's about the Wheel of Incarnation, you do see hell in the underworld, and you see Oni there. But there's also some like really sympathetic characters portrayed as Oni, such as the Oni pictured here, who you see meet as he's gathering peas for his family. Now, I mentioned that this is like a really sympathetic Oni. He's really sympathetic, one, because of course, like anyone who's going out and gathering food for their family when they don't have enough to feed them is sympathetic. But in folklore, during Setsuban, you throw peas in order to blind the Oni and drive them out. So this Oni is literally choosing the possibility of going blind so that his family won't go hungry. That was perfectly done. I mean, right? Like, that was awesome. Yeah. So she really uses this folklore to set up these characters. And if you're not familiar with Kyokai no Rine is a really interesting statement about haves versus have-nots and the way the world sets you up to either fail or succeed. And how, like, yes, karma happens, but what we see in the world, in our physical space, is not always reflective of who we are inside and like what we deserve. Like the karma we get outside this world isn't always reflective. So those are Oni, right? And like I said, they're very clear. They have the horns, they have for the most part, she does portray them in that tiger skin. And she really uses the folklore of the Oni to set up the characters. Sort of the most common other being in folklore associated with being supernatural, right, are probably yokai. This is probably the other thing, the other term and race that we aware of when we think of Japanese folklore. Yokai are a little different because Oni originally meant anything supernatural, and then it became really associated with the underworld and sort of these brutish beings. Yokai retained a little bit more of its animist tradition meaning, and yokai are where the supernatural origins for occurrences or events. So like this is why like earthquakes happen. These are the beings that cause floods and storms. And these aren't spirits per se. These are personifications of things and events. Which is, so in Kojiki, which is the earliest written text of Japanese folklore, it says that Izanagi returns from the land of Yomi, returns to the underworld, and where that water from the supernatural water from the underworld touches down, that's where yokai spring up. That's where the problems in the world come, when we had another world infringe upon ours. That sets up all the bad things that can happen. But again, they're the personification of events and the reasons things happen, right? And you're like, okay, so that's cool, but what yokai, how do they appear in Rumiko Takahashi's work? So we talked about the fact that Oni are like the big race in Urusei Yatsura, but the yokai become other alien races in Urusei Yatsura. You have Oyuki, who's a Yuki Onna, she's a snow woman, right? She's associated with cold and power, and in the new show, actually, they actually draw her hair to look like ice crystals to really pull that forward, this association with the cold, the snow, and the ice. And she's drawn as very pretty, which is, again, consistent with the folklore. The Yuki Onna are sort of seductress type characters. But she also is quiet and soft-spoken and portrayed as kind of a cold character. We also in Urusei Yatsura we have characters like Ron, who is based on a creature called a Gaki, which sometimes I hear them called like the Japanese version of a vampire. Basically, they have the ability, they feed on life force. So Ron sucks youth and vitality out of people, and she will intermittently appear with like demonic fang, like to have the real pointy teeth and pointy ears, and then her hair will be cloud-like at these times, and so the Gaki are believed to be able to form into like a smoke or a mist, and so Rumiko Takahashi is just really evoking that moment with Ron's character design. I mean, also some cuter ones, right? Some that are not so nasty. I think we all know Shippo, because Shippo's adorable. And I mean, Shippo is a kitsune, like he is a fox who has the power to change forms. There's also in Urusei Yatsura, there's actually a fox that they just call Kitsune. And we don't really know a whole lot more about that fox, but he's really cute, so I felt like I needed to mention him because I'm all about the cute characters. There's a couple more yokai. We have the Tengu, which is a Japanese spirit that lives in mountain forests. In folklore and their depictions, you can see at the bottom, they tend to be like grumpy old men with big noses, and they're kind of stumpy, and they have wings. They're associated with crows, and their wings often will be kind of crow-like. Like when they're drawn, they're often like big black wings that are kind of crow-like in shape. And Tengu can be, depending on, Tengu are not like inherently malicious, but they can be tricksters, and sometimes they're like creatures of war and conflict. Sometimes they are seen more as like protecting the mountains, but they're what cause the storms that come off the mountains, right? We were talking about yokai being these events. So just like a Yuki Onna is the reason why someone might make a bad decision in the snow that results in them dying from frostbite, or if you don't understand what could cause sudden death in someone who appears healthy, you have Nagaki. Tengu are like the cause of storms that come off the mountain. In Urusei Yatsura, we have the lovely Kurama, who is a princess and not at all a little ugly old man. However, she has power over wind. She uses a fan to control the wind, which is also really associated with the Tengu. And her hair does this like crow wing thing, right? Very evocative, clearly. And then all her minions are crows, right? This is a fun one too. The Jurogumo, which is a woman spider. So in folklore, the belief is that when an orc weaver spider gets to be 400 years old, it gets powers and becomes the size of a crow and can then shapeshift into a woman. Sometimes they portray it more as in the second picture, which is like having like the thorax and head of a woman, and then creepy spider legs, and when it becomes 400 years old, too, it also stops eating insects and starts to eat people, because why not? And basically, she convinces young men who are looking for one-night stands to come to her nest, and then kills them. I'm looking for a euphemism for that, but it's too late and I didn't have one. So a Jurogumo can also, the web is strong enough to capture someone and like make a human, a full-grown human, and make a cocoon, and it can control other spirits, other spiders. It's also depending a little bit on the mythos there and the folklore, they also sometimes are portrayed as venomous. And this mythology is one of the few that does not really have a lot of regional variation. It is found throughout Japan, everywhere but the island of Hokkaido and those northern latitudes, which sort of makes sense because orb weaver spiders don't live there because it's too cold for them. Yes.
I have a question. Okay, did you ever see Gravity Falls? Okay, then I
Now, I do think this is particularly interesting because, right, this is a horrific creature, but spiders are a good omen in Japan. So I have trouble sort of wrapping my head around the fact that, like, this orb weaver spider is terrible and all other spiders are excellent. Like, I just find that, like, an interesting aside. But Jurogumo, they give rise to a couple interesting pieces in characters in Rumiko Takahashi's work. An example of a character inspired by is Yura of the Hair, who's seen very early in Inuyasha. She's the very attractive, very scantily clad female demon who basically controls people. She uses hair instead of a spider web, but her overall portrayal and demeanor and the way she works is very related to the Jurogumo. Also, if you've read if you are familiar at all with Mao, which is the work that is currently being published, in the very first volume, there is a Jorogumo who happens to be the wife of a Viscount, who it turns out she has taken control of and killed. And she is, so there's a whole slew of murders of young men, and it turns out that this noble woman is actually a Jorogumo, and they have to, the main characters have to end her reign of terror and kill her, and to keep her from killing other young people. There's also, so Ayakashi is apparently sort of like an old-fashioned word that's come back in the parlance. And there's a lot of regional difference in what an Ayakashi is. Modern terminology sort of interchanges it with yokai. And actually in the series Mao, it is used, Rumiko Takahashi uses the term specifically to establish that he is old. Because he's sort of immortal. He's 900 years old in 1923 when we meet him. So she's deliberately trying to establish him as sort of an old-fashioned character, and she uses this term. But as I mentioned, it's sort of come back into fashion to use it in certain ways. To sort of, I guess it's sort of become a trendy term again, might be the best way to put it. But some of the interesting variations, as I mentioned, in regional, there's a lot of, that Ayakashi has a lot of regional variation, is that in some areas, particularly off the sort of eastern Japan, they are likened to sea serpents. So an Ayakashi is like is what we would call a sea serpent. In Western Honshu, they're sort of what we might call like a will-o'-the-wisp. So it's a light that leads you off a path where you don't to a path where you don't want to go, and they keep you from going towards the sea. And then also, if you're a sailor in different areas, particularly more south, they try to drown you. They try to get you to fill your boat with water so that you drown. So again, this is like one that has a lot of regional variation. And of course, probably the most famous yokai that Rumiko Takahashi has created, especially in the US, there is no like actual equivalent. This is well, there are some dog spirits. They're nothing like Inuyasha. They're not, and his family. So we're not going to talk about them extensively. I'm not going to talk about them extensively. But like Inuyasha's a yokai, right? He's a dog. He's a dog spirit. And it's kind of fun that she created him based loosely on mythology, but decided that like her character was going to be unique and different and not like a pre-existing kind of demon or yokai. I mean, Inuyasha, like there are just so many yokai in Inuyasha because pretty much the whole story is about yokai. And like every time you turn around, you're running all over another one. Raiten and Monten, like those are characters from the Raijin legend that exist. Like that legend exists. The Juboku, the eternity tree, the man-eating eternity tree. That again, that is that is based on a folklore story where there was a tree that landed on a pool of blood and absorbed blood, and then tried to eat people, because that's what trees do. That's a fun unreassuring sort of thing. And there are so many that all of these are from different. There's so many that she uses, and I can't go through them all. Like no one has enough time to do that. And she uses lots of cats, and her cats are primarily the cats she uses and the cats she talked about are primarily based on cats from folklore. They're particularly based on Mataneko and Bakeneko, or Nekomata, I'm sorry, Bakeneko and Nekomata. Nekomata summon fireballs and can change shape and fly. And I don't know a single cat in all of Rumiko Takahashi's work that can control fire, or fly, or change shape.
Shampoo.
Yeah. Shampoo is my favorite character in that. Just like, I love Shampoo so much. Like, Ranma 1/2 is great. But, she's my favorite character. But I don't know why my cats have this really I have Kilala plushies and I keep getting them because I love Kilala. And my cats have this really disturbing tendency to eat the eyes off my Kilala plushes. Yeah, it's like very disturbing. I don't know. I think they know something I don't. Yeah, so she uses lots of cats. And Kilala is specifically a Nekomata, which is a cat that has lived long enough that its tail splits down and then it has supernatural powers. And also, because Nekomata can be good or bad, that is sort of, for a long time, docking cats' tails was a practice in Japan. Because it was believed that if the tail couldn't split in two, it couldn't become this monstrous Nekomata and kill you. And people apparently felt like that, was a good idea, that they didn't want to die. Which, reasonable. And I mean, Japan is also not the only country, of course, that associates cats with the supernatural and docks their tails because of that. And also sort of interesting is that cats were introduced to Japan like roughly 1,000 years ago. And when they were first introduced, like they were rare. And so this folklore has grown up like about cats in the last 1,000 years. I'm just really distracted by the vibration. I'm sorry, guys. That timing is like the most perfect timing, and I'm here for it. And we also have characters like Rokumon in Kyokai no Rine. And I believe that Bakeneko can form contracts with Shinigami, which are basically like the Japanese version of the Grim Reaper, eliminating evil spirits, but also bring curses and demonstrate ill omens. The Rokumon in folklore, the Bakeneko would not necessarily have this ability, but Rumiko Takahashi's version has the ability to appear as a cute little kitten, or appearing as just a cat, or in a cat with a human face. Alright, so that brings us out of the yokai, and we're going to talk a little bit about more some of the physical, mythological elements. So we'll start with a common trope in Japanese and anime and pop culture based on folklore and Shinto religion, which are the idea of the 7 Shinto gods of luck. And so if you ever see like a whole bunch of figures in a ship in creature, they are often allusions to the seven gods of luck. Because the Shichi Fukujin, the seven gods of happiness, or seven beings of happiness, are Benten, Bishamon, Daikoku, Ebisu, Fukuro, Kuju, Hote, and Jirojin. And they appear in many different areas of Rumiko Takahashi's work, but probably one of the most notable is the fact that Lum's best friend is Benten, who is one of the seven lucky gods, or the seven beings of happiness. Interestingly, Benten in folklore is portrayed as like a very elegant, sort of demure lady. And Benten, of course, in Urusei Yatsura is a biker chick who can't drink enough, can't be loud enough, can't be brash enough. Also, the seven lucky gods who you would go to try to get rid of an Oni. So it's also fun that their relationship is that Lum, who's the princess of all the Oni, is a parent, and probably like one of the heirs apparent, is best friends with their sworn enemy in folklore. And they actually even have, there's a whole arc about on Zetsuban, they have like that that competition, and in Japanese folklore, that's the day you throw all the peas that I mentioned earlier to bring down the power of the seven lucky gods and get rid of them. So in Rumiko Takahashi's work in Urusei Yatsura, that's the day that those two races compete. Another allusion to magic and mysticism in Rumiko Takahashi's work is the Ushino Kokumari, which is sometimes referred to as like Japanese voodoo. Basically, the idea is that around 2 a.m. you go out and you hold a light and you perform a ritual with a straw doll, which then becomes an effigy for a person and represents that person. You can get someone to do something by manipulating the doll. The resemblance to the practice of like what we would call a voodoo doll is why sometimes it's called that. It is not part of a wider religious practice exclusive to the mainstream the way voodoo is, but it is sometimes called that. So in like if we think about Ranma 1/2 and we have Gosen Kugi, who's out there with like candles tied to his head, trying to get the girl of his dreams to like him and like hurt his rival. That is that practice is Ushino Kokumari. One that Rumiko Takahashi uses a lot is Kodoku and Annyodo. So we're gonna talk. There's a lot to unpack there, by the way. Annyodo is a practice that comes from Gumagic from China. Kodoku are used, as I mentioned, a lot in Rumiko Takahashi's work, particularly, and Kodoku is the practice of making like a salve or something that can heal, but also like a super weapon by shoving a whole bunch of poisonous insects into a jar and letting them all kill each other until only one survives. If you have read any of her work or are familiar with any of her work, that's going to sound really familiar. So that surviving creature can be used to create purses. That is, of course, in Inuyasha, that is, of course, how Naraku creates his body, right? He uses demons, not poisonous insects. But he creates his own version of Kodoku, which is a giant cavern in Inuyasha. Inuyasha, of course, acts in a hot-headed and impulsive way and breaks the spell before it's fully complete, but also sort of to its own detriment because he always acts in ways that in the long term are not necessarily to his benefit. It is alluded to in Kyokai no Rine, and in Mao is Mao is a practitioner of Annyodo. He's an Annyoji, and so he is healed. He is actually somewhat created by this Kodoku process, and he has to use the Kodoku process to create medicine to heal him when he is hurt and to repair damage, which is part of how he's lived 900 years. Because as I mentioned earlier, Rumiko Takahashi does a lot of work to establish him as like sort of being out of time. And I don't mean out of time like he's running out of time, but as someone who does not, the flow of time does not work normally for him. And in folklore, Annyodo, the Annyodo magic has a focus on the five elements, the five Chinese elements, which are fire, water, earth, wood, and metal. Notice air is not involved in this. And so there's a creature, 5 poisonous creatures, and each one corresponds with one of those elements. And so you were supposed, and Annyodo is not astrological magic. So you had to do these 5 element creatures that represent the 5 elements, and you then had to do it on the 5th day of the 5th lunar month, because that day was associated with this practice. So Annyodo, the lunar day, and the month really made a big, that was what dictated what practice you would do. And actually, you still see this in both Chinese and Japanese culture, but especially with this association of like you do certain things in certain seasons and at certain months have certain purposes because of this belief that that month has an association with an element, an astrological sign, which will affect the outcome. Also really common, particularly in Kyokai no Rine, are shikigami. So shikigami is the idea that if something lives long enough, it becomes sentient. So if something exists, I say lives, if an inanimate object exists for 100 years, it becomes animate and has sentience. So this is the reason why you are nice to your belongings and take care of them. Because if you're crappy to them when they're still around, they're gonna come after you. Right? This is the thing, not about Inuyasha, but this is the thing about like when Marie Kondo and everyone was like, it's really hokey that she says you should like take a nice parting from your beliefs. That's an incredibly Japanese belief that this item, you have to be nice to it because otherwise it will come after you. So shikigami, I'm sorry, these aren't the things that are 100 years old. I just totally misspoke. I found a problem. I apologize. Shikigami are part of Annyodo. There is something that's 100 years. It's just not called a shikigami. And everything I said is still accurate. It's just not shikigami, and I'm going to talk about it later. Yes?
I was going to say, I think you were referring to Sakumogami.
Yeah. I just didn't read my slides. So shikigami are associated with Annyodo. These are objects where the practitioner puts spiritual energy in. So typically, this is something light because the lighter it is, the less power is needed to animate it. And most commonly, it is a paper crane. They're usually something, so then you create it, you animate them by putting your own spiritual energy into them, and then it can function as a servant, and it can like do things like deliver a message, it can spy on a creature, it can like sort of fetch and carry. So one of the main characters in Mao, Otoya, is a Shikigami. Mao is a very powerful Onmyoji practitioner. He's a very powerful Onmyoji. So he's actually able to animate Otoya, who is a wooden doll, instead of being out of paper. And Otoya does things like, when he's hurt, he gets him his medicine. He does things like he will go and deliver messages and act as like another set of eyes and ears. There's another Shikigami in Mao called Uozomi, who is a fish instead of a boy, and he can go. There's a lot of water associations in Mao, so whenever someone needs to go underwater, Uozomi goes. A Tsukumogami, is the inanimate object that existed for 100 years and then became games as well, becomes sentient, as we were talking about. And I really need to change the order of the pictures because the Tsukumogami is the first picture there. The most iconic Tsukumogami in sort of modern parlance are paper lanterns and umbrellas, which are featured in a lot of anime and manga. And Tsukumogami have frequent appearances in the series Kyukai no Rine, because Rine has a seal that will make anything into a Tsukumogami. So instead of having to wait for 100 years for something to become sentient and then do things for him, he can just put a paper seal on it and have it become sentient and help him out. And again, this is like why you are nice to things, because how you treat something determines what that Tsukumogami is going to do when it becomes sentient. In Kyukai no Rine actually has to spend a lot of time educating our heroine on like taking good care of things, because she is Rine is a Grim Reaper. He's a Shinigami, and so he is a supernatural being. But the female protagonist is just like a modern high school girl, and so like she doesn't know these things, and so she will like not put things down in the right spot, things that maybe not take good care of them, maybe not be nice to them. And he's like, yeah, but when I need to use that, it's not going to be nice. It's not going to help me because you were mean to it, basically. I'm not going to talk anymore about Shikigami because we only have about 10 minutes left. So we're going to talk just a little bit about the concept of a soul in Shinto, because the Shinto believes that the soul is made up of 4 parts. You have Aramitama, which is like the rude soul or the passionate soul. The Nigimitama, which is like the harmonious soul, the calm soul. The Saki-mitama, which is a happy soul, and the Kushi-mitama, which is like the wondrous or wondering soul. And so the belief is in Shinto is that every living creature has all 4 aspects of that in them. And that these aspects have to be balanced in order to be successful, have good mental health, and live in peace and harmony within yourself and with the others around you. And that just sounds like the plot of Inuyasha, right? Right, that is literally, so the Shikan no Tama, the Jewel of the 4 Souls, is that Shinto belief that how we behave and how we act affects that balance within ourselves, and they just gave it an external form, that whatever you were doing when you hold that stone, that gem, the Jewel of the 4 Souls, affects the balance of the souls within that gem. There are some other instances instances of this. Most obviously in Urusei Yatsura, there's a whole sequence with Amaterasu in the manga where they talk about like having your soul be balanced and the importance of your actions balancing your soul, but also reflecting a balance. Yeah, Inuyasha is a little Shinto primer in a lot of ways, because the concept of the soul has even more to it. The human spirit, slightly different than the soul, is made up of two parts: the haku and the kon. Haku is the part, it's your like physical being, right? And kon is the spiritual part of your being, the non-physical part of your being. So haku is made of the earth, and when you die, your haku returns to the earth. It's your physical being. Kon is not residing in the body and does not have its own physicality. And when you die, the kon is the part of you that like goes to the afterlife, but the haku is the part of you that's in the ground. It's what gives you life. The Shinto belief is that your haku and your kon can be separated. And so you can have out-of-body experiences where your kon is kind of out moving around while your haku is like chilling in a chair or a bed, whatever. But also that if your kon leaves while your haku is out moving around, you are a walking dog, right? And so you want those two things unified. That's kokoro. And they're supposed to be interactive and independent and in balance. And this is what makes Kikyo possible, right? So the witch who pulls Kikyo's body back together knows how to make her haku reassemble from the bits that are in the earth. It's ashes, of course, because she's cremated, but how to make her haku. And when you first see Kikyo reborn, she's only haku, right? There's no life to her, really. She's just this, like, she'll obey orders, but she can't really do anything. When Kagome gets close, part of they share the same home, right? They're the same. That part of her that is reborn in Kagome. That is the part that actually. So that cone splits. It's also how in Inuyasha there's a lot of things where people who have, and this it comes back in Inuyasha a lot, where there are creatures or beings who have died and are somehow reborn, and it's related to this idea that we have a physical manifestation of ourselves separate from the spiritual manifestation of ourselves, and if you can control that spiritual manifestation, you can control the body. So it's interesting because the idea of a soul is very layered and different, right? Like your soul has these four parts that need to be in balance within your right, and that's sort of like what we might think of as like our heart, right? Like our soul, our spirit, and then we have what we would call our soul, which is completely separate from our physicality. Whereas the Shinto belief is that that soul is part of our physicality and can be split. Right. So. And Kyokai no Rinne is all about the Buddhist circle of reincarnation and then the transmigration of the soul. Rinne actually, which is the character name for the main character, for the protagonist, actually refers to the transmigration of soul. It refers to souls. That word actually means like your soul going around the wheel of reincarnation. And Kyokai no Rinne, of course, personifies this. It actually makes, instead of this wheel of incarnation being like a conceptual thing, there's a physical place where Grim Reapers take souls so that they can go across the river and go on this wheel to find to begin the cycle of rebirth. Okay. I think I've been talking for a little bit. So basically the takeaway is that Rumiko Takahashi uses lots of folklore to enrich her work and references it both in its purest form and also subverts it to make points about her characters and about her worlds. It is not necessarily accurate, right? Like, if you're subverting something, of course, you are inherently like changing the accuracy of it, but you're still using it to make your world and characters richer. She also has a lot of religious references that are very important and that really play out and expand the understanding that really expands the plots of her work. All right. I've been giving panels for 12 hours so far today. So I'm just going to say that this is where you can find me. I will also freely admit that if you reach out in any way on Twitter, I probably will not respond because, yeah, Twitter and X and whatever it is right now. And then, if you like this and you did not mind my ramblings for the last hour, you can find, I and my partner have some more panels later today, and one on Sunday, and you can come check us out there. Yeah, we started. Yeah, we started this panel yesterday.
Okay, can you go back to your social media page? Thank you.
Are you familiar with the Pop Culture Museum in Seattle?
Yes.
They actually have a section for all the works that they came in that museum for.
Oh, that's really awesome.
Like it's like a kiosk thing where you like they basically name like what spin railroad and color people did John fiction and she's part of it.
Yeah. I am a little sad that like Kyokai no Rine did not get more recognition over here. Like, it got a 3-season anime. Like the manga did really well and the anime did well enough to get 3 seasons that are 25 episodes each. But like, no one I talked to read it. Very few people I talked to have read it or watched it, and I just think that's really unfortunate because it's really great. And Mao, which is out currently, is also really great. And she said she thinks it's going to be her last serialized work because she's getting older and she does not want to be someone who died mid-work. Like, she wants her work to be done. So I'm like, she's not going to stop working, but she's going to stop serializing these long series. Take what I can. Just buy it all. Well, thank you for putting up with my rambling and my nonsense for the last hour. Usually more coherent, I promise. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel.